I'm running a new campaign. I have new characters, new location, new NPCs. What do I do? The first game of a campaign can be a struggle to run.
We've all been there. So today we're going to talk about things that we do to make it more fun.
Hi, I'm Chris.
And I'm Matt.
Welcome to Roleplay Chat.
We're two game masters who just can't stop talking about role-playing games.
Today, we talk about the first game and a campaign.
There's a lot of things that go on in the first game, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions about what you should be doing and shouldn't be doing. Things like NPC introduction, or hot starts and cold starts, starting off in a dungeon, starting off in combat, making big decisions.
Yeah.
And at the very end, should you be killing off player characters?
So today we're going to explore these aspects of the first game and talk about our experiences and a lot of ideas that could help you, that you could steal if you'd like.
There's a lot to talk about, that's for sure. So let's get right into it. I think I'm ready, Chris.
I'm ready, Matt.
Let's roleplay chat. All right, so what's the first question we have prepared for our show today, Chris?
The first question is, what's literally the first thing that happens in your game one?
Okay, the first thing that happens in game one. I mean, for me, I kind of like the theory of having action right out of the gate. I know there's a lot of people out there on the internet that say that the best thing to do is just combat or some intense moment. I'm not sure I'm there, all the way there on the scale.
Yeah.
But I definitely like making it clear to the players that they're here and that they have to make a choice. I like making them take a choice right from the get-go. One thing that I did in a recent campaign was the game started, they were in a boat, like a rowboat, coming down the river, and the rowboat is leaking.
Okay, so it's like problem solving right away.
So they're trying to figure out, like, what do we do? Can we fix the boat? Can we stop the boat from sinking? And basically right before they solve it, I have people on either side of the river screaming for help because there's monsters attacking. So it's kind of like there's this combat that they need to decide, am I going to help the people on the left side of the river or on the right side of the river?
Interesting.
So again,
and
choices.
You make them like significant, like you put a significant difference where they're like priests or like peasants or something?
Relative difference, yeah. In this case, there was a family of farmers who were fighting off these like monsters, and the same monsters were attacking, they were like town guards. So they went to help the villagers because they looked less equipped to be able to deal with the situation. But in doing that, I'm not closing doors for them, but you're building a relationship with the villagers that you're helping, and you're not building a relationship with the town's guard.
Yeah.
And you're making a decision. And the reason I like this is because it starts the pace fast, it's quick, and it makes it obvious that this is a role-playing game where your decisions will matter. And I think that that's something that I've introduced slowly but surely into my first games, because a lot of my players tend to play video games a lot.
Oh, that's true.
They like being able to explore all of their options, whereas here it kind of, there's no backtracking. You can't say, oh, actually we're doing this instead. Your decision was made, and it's fine. It's
consequences.
Okay, but there are consequences and there are perks to each decision that you make. So that's what I do. Or at least I've done that a few times now. I've used the same little village as my first starting point for a few campaigns, and it's worked great. How about yourself, Chris? What do you like to do right out the gate?
So what I do when I start a new campaign is I make sure they have a little bit of time to role play, so that the characters can talk to the other characters, the other players, and also NPCs. That way, I make sure they can show a little bit of their character because I assume they have some background. They want to show their personality, maybe their quirky attitude and stuff like that. But I make sure that as soon as it slows down a little bit, I throw an encounter. Mostly more often than not, it's going to be a combat. But so I make sure they show off their characters in terms of roleplay, and then they show off their characters in terms of combat. Well, show off or try, right? So that way I feel like in the first 30-45 minutes, we get a feel of everybody's strengths and weaknesses.
That's interesting. I think the thing that I like the most, Chris, is that we're both saying that we have combat as a relatively early part of our first session. The reason I think that's funny is because I don't think either of us really like combat that much.
That's true. That's true, actually. Yeah, I feel like we use it as a tool to cut the sequence so that the players don't feel obligated to always talk. And it drives the action. It's a nice respite from just talking all the time.
I think that kind of segues nicely into our next question, which was, where does combat live in your first session? Obviously, we both think it's something that we like to add near the beginning. I wonder if it's a pacing thing.
I think it's a lot of that. I think there's also, for me, there's the worry of if I have a character, like a player, who built his character for combat and he's really excited to try it, special abilities. If there's no combat in the first session, it's going to be disappointing for that person. So maybe it's not for me. It's to make sure I get a little bit of everything.
Yeah, to kind of show it off.
But it's true that it helps pacing. Like, I wonder if everybody would like, oh, we really like role play, I think I would still put combat in the first encounter and in the first session.
Yeah, because it kind of also allows you the opportunity to have more control over, maybe not control, but you have a better understanding of whose turn it is, whose action it is, and it kind of allows you to very easily dictate the movements of the enemies that they're fighting. Maybe it's a story tool that we're using in some sense.
I was thinking actually that it's a good way to raise the
stakes.
Raise the stakes.
Yum, I love steak. It raises the stakes.
There's other way to do it, but I think that's an easy and fast way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if you're playing with new players, I find that when you're playing with new players, that's kind of what they come to expect too, right? They've heard of rolling for initiative. They know what combat is, and even the least experienced players won't feel too uncomfortable in a combat situation. In a role play situation, you're looking at a completely different beast. So yeah, I guess we include combat. We like including combat. Why do we include combat? We're still not 100% sure. But it definitely helps me, and I think you're saying the same thing, that helps with our pacing of the story.
I usually use it as to change the statu quo. So we start with the situation, and the encounter is the thing that shows up and that's the problem you're gonna have to deal with for the session. Yeah, and it's usually the thing. It's not just a combat and then done, and then you go back to roleplay. It's the thing you're gonna have to deal with for the rest of the game. So if goblins are attacking and you kill the goblins and then everything is fine, that's not really interesting. It needs to be like, the goblins are attacking, we defended the city, but they captured the little girl, and now you have to get the little girl. And now it's clear to everybody, this is your mission.
Yeah. I think you nailed it on the head there. That's exactly how I use it as well, and I guess I didn't really know. But that's what I did in my situation where there was the river and there was the monsters attacking. Those monsters were the monsters that were plaguing the continent, or not the continent, but plaguing that province, and the heroes, their ultimate objective was to eventually try to rid these things from the province. So you're right, it's a story element, it pushes the stakes forward, and it pushes the story forward in a way that you can't really do through discussion and role play alone.
Yeah, because consider the alternative of the little story I just said, where it's we're talking in a tavern, and then someone rushes in and is like, the little girl has been captured. Works, but then you kind of have a pacing issue now that you have to, okay, we've been talking, now we're gonna talk more, and then we'll investigate, and maybe by the end of the game we'll have an encounter. I feel like it's better to have like a little punctuation there.
Yeah,
and then it starts from there.
Absolutely.
Solve.
Perfect. So I think, I'm not sure if this is the same order we had planned before, Chris, but this to me pushes us towards another question that I've asked myself quite a few times, and it's, do you start a campaign in a dungeon? And the reason I'm saying that it segues is because from a different perspective, this story of the little girl being stolen away by the goblins could also start from, you are at the base of a cave, you see goblins patrolling the cave, your mission is to go in and save the blacksmith's daughter. Something like this.
Mm-hmm.
I think Matt Colville, in one of his videos, mentions a similar approach to running your first game, where you're right in front of the dungeon and it's clear to you that you're going in it to save someone. Have you ever done this?
I haven't, because to me, I really like it for one shots. But if I plan on running a big campaign, this feels really impersonal to me. It feels like the characters, their background doesn't matter yet, and it shows that maybe it's not gonna matter in the long, or at least in the next couple of games. Yes, because like if we watch a movie, sometimes it starts in the action, but it's really short, and then it's about the character. Where if this is you spend the whole encounter, like the whole session, and by the end, you haven't really talked to the other players. You've just been, okay, now we get in, then we fight the thing, and we advance. I feel like it's going to be harder to put that role play in. So that depends on how much role play you want to do. But you know that with a name like Roleplay Chat, like we really like role play. So I feel like you need to put the role play before. But like I said, for one shots, when maybe you don't care about everybody's background and their mothers and whatnot, then maybe that's a good way. But have you done that?
No, I don't think I have. I'm trying to think back, and it's always been, or almost always been, in like a small hamlet, like a small town, where it's the players aren't faced with the intensity of a big city because there's too much happening.
Yeah.
But for the same reason you said, I feel like starting right in a dungeon is maybe a little bit impersonal. It, like you said, it doesn't really give the players the opportunity to role play, to meet other people in the town, to kind of get a feeling for themselves of the setting. But I wonder if there's a way to do that, and I think I might like to try. But it definitely wouldn't be in a goblin cave. It would have to be in like a bandit's cave, or like a morally gray enemy's cave, where you go in and you still like talk, and you still have the opportunity to avoid combat in certain situations. Something like this maybe could work.
I think if I would to use maybe a similar example, let's say I want to do a jump start, like they say a hot start, right? You want to hot start it. Then I think I would not start at the entrance of the cavern where there would be multiple rooms. I would start at the last room. I'd be like, you've been
kidnapped or something.
No, I was thinking more like, you've been exploring the dungeon. You are now in front of you know that behind that door there's 5 goblins and there's the little girl, and that way you start with just the encounter, and then the role play is when you bring the little girl and you meet the villagers, and then the aftermath of the mission. But that's a hot start for heroic campaign. I feel like it, like you want to start by showing that the statu quo is that your characters are cool and they are heroic. Where something like Warhammer, I tend to start with like, I want to show them that they're not insignificant, but that they're not heroes yet. They have to earn it, right? So I guess it depends what you want. But I would like, as a player or as a game master, maybe try starting a game by basically doing the last encounter of a small mission.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of neat. I've never considered that. I would like to play that as well. Cool.
Let's do it. Yeah, and I think that brings us nicely to the question where we ask ourselves, what are the scope? Because you were talking about the hamlet, you were talking about a little village, not a big city, and I was wondering, is it a rule for you that you never start in a big city?
So is that a rule, not to start in a city? Honestly, I've never really thought of it as a hard-pressed rule. But the reason why I do that is because I find that starting in a city leaves too many open doors or closed doors. I like
too many doors.
Too many doors, closed or open, who knows. But I like to give my players the opportunity to follow any lead they want.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in a small hamlet of 4 to 10 families, you guys are going to learn this about me and about Chris too. We plan too much. We don't make our lives easy. So when I'm planning my first session, I'm planning every single person in the town with the possibility that my players say, you know what, I don't want to save the blacksmith's daughter. I would much rather go to the priest and ask him about his religion and follow him home to his priest land that has the temple of whatever in it.
Yeah.
So to save myself the trouble of planning every single person in a whole village, in a whole like city, I kind of meet my players in the middle, where I have a small hamlet where they can, if they want to talk to everyone, they can, because I have it prepared. And I make sure that there's enough interesting things going on in that hamlet that, sure, there's this thing that's happening and the town's guard is rushing off to save the little girl from the goblins, and you can follow them. But you don't have to. There's other options like, I don't know, like I said, going to the church and seeing that there's people that are sick there, and one of the people that's there dying has a wish that you deliver their medallion to their sister in the town across the river. Something like this. I don't...
So do you prepare all, like, multiple quests then?
Yeah.
With equal possibilities, or it's like...
My first session is there's... I prepare multiple quests with one that I want to happen.
Okay.
There's one that I want to happen, and I try to make sure it happens. And then I have these other quests that are possible. If the players speak to the right NPCs about the right things, those NPCs might hint towards these things being something that they want to get done. But by no means are they as pressing or as urgent. To go back to my example about the village where they're on the river, there's the monsters coming out. In this little village, I have two things happen.
Okay.
The first is that someone gets kidnapped. Usually not a little girl, because I feel like that happens too often. It's usually like the father of someone who's actually a combat veteran who's gone off to fight these things and hasn't been back yet. He should be back, but he's not.
That's interesting.
And then the other one is I usually have something important, like a relic from the local church, or maybe a statue that has a gem in it. I have that gem get stolen by a thief.
Okay.
So the players can decide, do they care about this gem and stopping the thief, or do they want to go and potentially save this father? To me, the decision is clear. You go save the guy. The gem is a gem, but to the villagers, the gem is important to the morality and all of this. So it kind of presents multiple scenarios to the players, all of which are perfectly valid. But if you do one, Again, you might not be able to do the other one. You might never get the gem back. The guy might be dead if you wait too long.
Mhm.
If you try to do one and come back and then go to the other one, who knows?
And do you link those two quests, or they're separate, or would they merge at one point, or you're not worrying about that too much?
In the first couple of sessions, I don't worry about it too much. In terms of scope, though, I do like to try to tie in to the main narrative in some way, but it's very loose. So I try to make sure that these two missions or several missions that I have planned can be brought back to whatever the main storyline is.
Okay.
In this adventure that I'm talking about, the one in the river and the monsters coming out of the river and all this, the main story arc is there's an evil wizard who is summoning these beasts out of the rivers. So out of all the water sources, are these monsters coming and attacking people. So regardless of where the players go, if they go to save the father who went to fight the goblins, or if they go to steal the gem back from the thief, I try to tie that story arc back in loosely so that they're presented with the long-term objective without being too much in their face. Like they still kind of feel like they're accomplishing a mission. They can come back to town feeling like heroes. I know this goes against your Warhammer theories, but to me, I like letting the players have a win.
Mm-hmm.
Where they can come back to town, they can deliver the gem. Look, I brought it back. They put it in the statue, the little ceremony. Everyone in town loves them. And they kind of feel important, but only in this little town.
Yeah.
And it kind of propels them forward. Like, okay, we did this. What's next? The next thing is to go find the big bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you're saying in terms of like something that is linked to the main plot, because I like to do this too. The first game, it was there was a mission to escort a group of people, and then during that adventure, there was a relic that they had to deliver, and then at this point they had another, like basically it's a ball that's never stopping. It's always rolling. Mm-hmm. So before I meet the end of one adventure, I like to put something to start the next one, and that's hard. Because you need to plan it, you need to know where you're going, you need to seed stuff in advance. But the first game we've played in that campaign, I brought it back at the last game. Like my last game after, I don't know how many games did we play?
Almost 2 years.
Yeah, and the first game we played 2 years ago is still relevant to the last game. So that's for me, that's a whole campaign.
Yeah. In terms of the scope of your campaign, of your first session, Chris, do you also kind of have like a size barometer where, oh, I'm not starting in the big town, or oh, I don't want to be starting somewhere too irrelevant? Like, is there a flexibility there, or is it pretty clear cut in your mind?
When I did the last campaign, it was pretty clear cut that it was not going to be a city for very similar, basically the same reason you're saying. It was, I didn't want to take the time to build or learn a whole city. Mm-hmm. But I knew you guys were going to go to Middenheim, so I had to plan it. But for the first game, I liked the idea of getting there and seeing the big city and experiencing the coming to that city.
Yeah.
Where now I think because I've played for a while in that city, I know pretty well the locations. I'd be down to start right away with new players. Mm-hmm. Start right away in the city, and maybe have them be like city people, where you were a couple of you guys were more like
maybe small town or not small town, but
like adventurers.
Yeah, on the road.
Yeah, but I mean, it makes sense for adventurers not to start in a big town. So, but I'd be open to it because my prep has been done.
Yeah, I've considered for quite some time now, because in my one-shots I've been running these one-shot campaigns, one-shot games.
Yeah, linked.
That are very loosely linked.
Yeah,
and I've been toying with the idea of doing something like this too, where I throw the players in to a big city, and their objective is to, because they're part of this thieves guild, is to just steal the most valuable thing they can think of. And I don't know what that is.
Yeah, improvise.
It'll be improvised. But I have, I'll have a couple of parts of the city in my head, like, okay, there's going to be this really, really big church, or there's going to be this super fancy portrait that they could steal. Or, oh, there's going to be this old rich guy who's like the king of commerce in this town, and you can go into his house and you can steal his personal vault. So I'll have these ideas, but it'd be interesting to kind of throw that at the players, to also give them the opportunity to surprise me and say, like, oh, you know what? This is a really big city. It's going to definitely have a gold forge where they forge stuff out of gold. And I'm like, you know what? Sure. Let's see where this goes. And kind of roll with it that way. It might be a hot mess, but I've been considering it for a little while.
Yeah, I think it's good to let the player take the reins sometimes. In the thing I was saying before with like keeping the ball rolling and always adding one thing, sometimes it's the player that come up with it. Like players start something and I tend to maybe put a little like delay on it. Be like, okay, you want to accomplish this, but you're going to need 1 day to prepare or whatever. And then they continue dealing with the other stuff. So next time I can have a better idea of where I'm going to go with it. So, but it's similar to what you're saying, but maybe on a longer scale.
Yeah, I mean, in my example, it's more of a one-shot situation. I'm not sure how comfortable I would feel yet. Things that worry me are also like the players. If the players are put in this really, really big and busy environment, to keep the realism of this big, busy city, it would have to be with experienced players. I couldn't see myself doing this with a group of people. Like after work, I have a couple of people from work who want to try playing Dungeons and Dragons or any kind of role-playing game. I think the big city might be too difficult.
Yeah, because it's a sandbox game, right? It's too open-ended. Even if you have some markers there, because new players will look at you and be like, so what
am I supposed to do?
What are we doing? What's my objective here? So if you're like, well, you do whatever you want, explore, it's not great. But for experienced player, I think that would be interesting. Where on the other side, if you have experienced player and you're like, you're doing this mission and nothing
they might
else,
say like, no way, Jose.
Yeah, exactly.
Not gonna happen. Let the blacksmith's daughter die.
Yeah, exactly. So you never know. Players are there for chaos.
So let's change gears a little bit and kind of focus a little bit more on relationships and players. The next question we have prepared is, what kind of relationships do your player characters have when you're entering the first session? So Chris, I'll let you kind of start us off here on this one.
Yeah, for me, to make sure that the characters feel like they're part of the world, I tend to create key NPCs that are linked to the player characters. So let's take the example of the Blood and Betrayal campaign that we're running, that we're showing off in the campaign diaries. I made sure that the characters were linked to either Granny Mosher, which was an old woman there, or the Captain Guard, or whatever. You just make sure that they're linked to someone, because if they live there, even for a short time, they've met someone.
Yeah.
Right? So it makes sense that they have, even if it's really basic, some kind of relationship. And I also like to make sure that there's relationships between the player characters. So,
yeah,
and
that's
I think
a big one.
I think that's
important one.
Kind of implied in campaigns where we're like, yeah, it's important for group cohesion. Well, I don't know if it is actually implied. I think it's implied for us.
Yeah, because we
not
care so much about it. But
yeah, it might not be actually. So I try to make sure that this guy is the brother of her, and he's a childhood friend or something, to make sure they're attached. And I think it needs, we did that once in one of your one shot, where we were like, find someone that you like, find someone that you don't like, and tell us why. And not like is not like disruptive.
I wanna kill them.
Yeah, it's just like, you know what, when he talks too much about himself, I don't like being too close to him. Just that. And doing these form triangles, and then that just sparks roleplay.
Oh yeah, and it feeds the fire. I got that idea from a small role-playing improv game that we played before called Fiasco.
Yeah.
So if you've never checked it out, I would encourage you to take a look. I really love Fiasco because of this. It's a game where the whole game is based on the relationships of the people playing it. And the drama that ensues is derived from those relationships. So I really stole that idea from that game and brought it into my one shot. And I have every intention to add it to the next first campaign that I'm going to run. Because like you said, it creates these springboards where if you've never role played before and me and you are playing a game together, it's hard for me to have an interaction with you out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But if I know and we're on the same page that we have a relationship where the two of us are brothers.
But we're competitive.
And we're super competitive.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of gives us this common ground to start from, and it kind of lets us take that and run with that idea. And I honestly think that even in a long-term campaign, there's a lot of room for evolution in those relationships, no matter how simple and basic you make them at the very beginning.
Yeah, and I sometimes try to mimic some behavior that happened in real life. For instance, I had my now wife play in a game with one of my friends, and we had played board games before, and they're always like nagging at each other. So I figured if they start nagging each other like this in the middle of a role-playing game, it might create problem with the synergy and everything. So I made them brother and sisters. And then it made total sense. The guy was really protective, and the girl was like, I can do my own stuff.
That's funny.
And they were still nagging each other like when we played board game, but it added this layer of this helps the role play.
Yeah, it just makes it richer and more fun. And then those players don't feel bad either. I know that I would feel like I was detracting from the story, but if it's enriching the story, everyone's happy and it's more fun. It's more fun for me. Sorry, there's a thing flying in my face.
But you need to be careful with too much conflict, right? So, yeah, make sure you have too good for one bad maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would work. But I think relationships are good in general, and I like them because they allow for fun role play.
So do you start with relationship between the player characters and the NPCs, or do you build them as you play?
In the more recent campaigns that I've run, I make sure that the players have a discussion before, kind of like a session 0, where they're building those relationships from the very beginning.
What about NPCs?
In terms of NPCs,
because they could be like, we're a group, we have some synergy, but we arrive in a new village that we don't know. Like, you could start there.
Yeah, and I think that's what I've been doing more often than not. I try to link them to NPCs that are part of the overarching campaign. But that first session is really about getting to know one another as players, as game master, getting to know each other's play style. And I feel like having important NPCs that know one player kind of steals spotlight away from people. I like to give everyone this even playing field and let people make the decisions that they want to be making. And as the games move forward, if you meet an important NPC, it feels a little bit more natural than if right out of the gate in the first 20 minutes of the game you're meeting your long lost master or something. Like I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I've never tried it, so it's hard for me to completely dismiss that idea. I don't know. Is that something that you've considered doing?
Well, I've done a little bit of it. Like I said, I tried to make triangles so that two people are always concerned with the safe, like the well-being of the NPC. Or it's true that if you start and you bring an NPC and then you have a discussion, 10-minute discussion with one of the players, the other 3 or 4 players at the table might just find it really boring. So you need to be careful with that. But if that player, that character, that NPC is linked to two other players, then you can use the game master can be part of the discussion and then kind of make the player characters talk to each other, where they might not if there's not that NPC to be the medium, if you want.
I guess that kind of brings us into just NPCs in general. We had a question about NPCs and their role in the first game. So obviously we're saying that we want our NPCs to, or you're saying, Chris, you want them to kind of bring them together. Do NPCs serve any other role in your first game?
Yes, I think they're there maybe to show off some of the background of the other characters. I like, for instance, an example that comes to mind is Randall in my campaign. I know like his character was a bit had low self-esteem and stuff like that. But when I bring his father, and his father is emotionally abusive to him, it kind of shows, it put depth into the character of that player from an NPC perspective. And then maybe they're like, you know what? Hell with that guy. Not to say something else. and then that creates a bond, right? You feel empathy, and so I use it for multiple, like an array of things, and I use it to bond the characters together, the players, and to show what the other are living through as we start, because otherwise it's hard to be like, oh, hello, oh, hi, I have baggage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that you say that it allows you to explore your players, because I don't think I've done that too much, especially in my first campaigns, or sorry, in my first games of a campaign, because I really try to disassociate it. I tend to use my NPCs to create bonds within the world instead. So you're coming to this small hamlet, for instance. You're talking to the owner of, I don't know, of a brewery that lives in this hamlet. Speaking to him gives you background and kind of like exposition without it being me reading a block text. They sought out an NPC because they thought he could give them something cool, and in the process of them exploring his shop, they learn a little bit more information about, there's these monsters that come out of the river every once a month on the full moon. What's all that about? Like, but he doesn't really know. It just ruins his harvest, and it makes it hard for him to brew his beer. But
go ask.
Yeah, I don't know, but
the erudite Fred or whatever.
Yeah, so it kind of creates this this adventure within itself, where if you want to talk to the NPCs, you can, because they give you information, they give you context. I've never really used it for that purpose, but I do like that sharing and showcasing the backstory of other players.
Yeah, like at the beginning, I have talked about his abusive dad, but also like he was really close to Granny Mosher, who was like his maternal figure and taking care of him. So you could, at the beginning, Randall was pretty central to the story. Yeah. Because that was kind of his turf. And where your character was, I feel like, felt a lot more mysterious to the other players, because you didn't really have NPCs to show what you were thinking and what you were like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wonder what kind of scenario would happen in a game where the first campaign, everyone has these NPCs for them. It could be interesting. You know, you bring together a group of people, and everyone there is like a brother or a sister or a long friend, like a long standing family friend. And you're using the NPCs to showcase who these players are to the players who are playing characters that they ought to know. But like, it's almost like, let me learn about my own character through interactions with the NPCs. That could be really cool.
Yeah.
If anyone's tried something like that before, please let us know. Write down in the comments or write to us. I'd love to know if that went well, because it's something that very recently I've been thinking a lot about, and this kind of like family-centric.
Yeah, we had a really short discussion that we kind of kept for a role play chat, but like a lot of good stories, and I think that was a really valid, very good observation from you. Like a lot of the good stories in movies and books are around families. So yeah, sometimes I think for role playing game, there's a tendency to do orphans and do like, oh, I'm this loner adventurer, and even though I knew that, and I tried to not do it, not overdo it, I still have like a lot in my group of player characters. So and group of characters, I should say. So sometimes it's hard because you want to have like no attachment, start blank slate, we just start from there. But I feel like it's the past that brings the drama in.
Yeah, for the most part. And a lot of players, and by no means is this is a bad thing, but a lot of players like to have a character that's very intricate. Or at least in my experience, whenever I would bring a player character forward in a Dungeons and Dragons game that I'd be playing as a player, I would come up with this elaborate backstory. Oh, I used to be a slave that worked for the slaver who was off in this part of the world, and I ran away, and he's trying to get me back, and blah, blah, blah. And most of the time, my game master was like, this has nothing to do with the main plot, which really sucked. But that's kind of where my idea of what if you had a game where all the players' backstories, they weren't very elaborate, or maybe they were, but they were all interwoven very, very tightly.
Like the first half is almost the same thing, and then the second half is your personal story amongst that group.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Who knows?
Maybe we should do a series that is us trying things we
trying and failing miserably. I don't know.
So Matteo, we know of another way to start. Some people like to start a game by basically saying, put your characters aside. Here's other characters. We're gonna play another scene that is not around your characters. It's maybe you see the villain, like the beginning of a plot. Maybe you see an ancient history, a scene from ancient history where this artifact was thought to be destroyed, but is actually still in existence. And that's going to be like, your whole story is going to be around that artifact. So you show like kind of a peep behind the curtain, something that we see a lot in the movies, but not necessarily a lot in role-playing games.
Yeah, I hate that. I can't stand it. When I'm a player playing in a game, I hate it because I care about that story, sure, but I want to play my character.
Yeah.
I put a lot of thought or effort, or the game master put a lot of thought or effort into my character. This exposition, I think there are better ways to do it. And there are more engaging ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That might be an unpopular opinion. I know a lot of really popular movies, a lot of really popular video games start off with like this like flashback or flash forward to an event that you're going to build up to.
Are you against that in movies? And
no, in movies,
no, right.
I'm fine with it because I'm signing up to sit down and watch.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm playing a role-playing game, I'm a spectator, but I also expect to be
involved,
an actor that's engaged in the story that's kind of unfolding in front of me. This isn't to say that I hate it when the game master pulls out a sheet and has a couple of lines written out. Like that kind of, it's gonna happen. Mm-hmm. Especially when you're starting a campaign in a new world, in a new setting, you kind of need that context.
Yeah, I personally like to do that paragraph of just setting up the scene, but I know what you mean in terms of like, be like, okay, let's play half an hour of something entirely different than the whole campaign. It's not great to set up what's gonna happen in the future. If they spend a lot of time creating the characters, well, too bad. You're gonna wait. So it postpones part of the fun. Would I do that? I don't think I would actually.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I don't think I have as strong as an opinion as you would. Like, I hate it. I think as a player, if a game master would do that and it would do it well, I would enjoy it. But as a game master, I would not feel comfortable doing it. Like, especially sometimes they do it with like high power characters. Like this big combat happened eons ago, and it's just like, yeah, let's not start playing level 20 characters or like Let's start small. Like we were saying with the city, starts in a village maybe. Well, for characters, the same thing. Start with not a lot of powers.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's hard to reel it back after.
It's hard to bring it back. It's hard for that not to spiral out of control too, right? Like,
What if they
decide to do something else? And as a player, you don't want to be told like no, you can't do that because that's not what happened eons ago. Well, I'm the player. You're giving me this guy to play. I'm gonna play. So yeah, I mean, they're not gonna do something that ridiculous, hopefully. But yeah, I just don't like it. And yeah, I don't know. A lot of exposition in your first game, I think, gives the players the wrong taste in their mouth. A lot of exposition anytime.
Yeah.
I don't have fun with. I maybe I'm going off on a tangent here, but I did one game when I was like one of my first times being a game master ever, and it had a lot of exposition in it. The players, it was maybe like 4 or 5 games in, I had them like transported to this dimension where all of the ancient gods were, but like they were all not there, and they had to figure out like, oh, this is the temple of the ancient gods, and there were symbols everywhere, and there was like weapons for each god and all this stuff. And it was just like this huge waste of time because the players didn't understand. I was doing a poor job.
It was very cool in your head.
In my head, it was like, yeah, this is gonna be so much fun. They're gonna care so much about these ancient gods that are gonna be like the lore behind everything. And they didn't really care that much.
Yeah. That's a mistake I feel like we all make at one point, is creating a story that's more it's you're more attached to the story than having your players actually run it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like go through it. You need to like have we don't like to give tips here, but if your characters are not part of your story, then what the hell are you doing, right? Just write a book. And I think it's something, it's a trap that not only first time game master fall in, because my brother game mastered for me for years. I love my brother as a game master, and at one point we were playing so often that we were playing improv. We were playing just show up, just go with it, and these were so fun. And one day my brother was like, you know what, I'll create this big campaign. And he spent a lot of hours on this campaign. And when we started playing it, just exposition. We were just going through the motion from one place to the other.
To hear the story that he was telling you.
Yeah, basically. And it was a great story, but we weren't part of it really at this point, probably. But we never got to it because nobody like I think my wife was in that game too, and just like, you know what, I'm not playing anymore. So it's be careful. Be careful.
I can't remember who said it. I'll try to figure out who it was and give them the credit for it. But there was an editor, I think, for the Wizards of the Coast might have said something along the lines of, nobody cares about your next Tolkien universe. They just want to sit down and have fun. And lately, that's kind of been the mentality of a lot of my first games, a lot of my one-shots, a lot of the campaigns that I'm trying to develop and run is just that. It's people want to come, they want to have fun, they don't want to be read a story, or at least that's my impression. So I try to avoid as much exposition as possible, and I hide it in places where if they care, they can find out.
Yeah, and I think actually we went on a tangent, but I would like to have a discussion in a roleplay chat about how to do exposition right, kind of deal. Because I have strong opinions on this too, actually.
Awesome. So we'll save that for another time, and let's kind of segue into our last question of the video, and I think it's a doozy. Chris, what do you think about player character death in the first game session? That's
a very good question.
He's just saying that because he came up with it.
For character death, I never plan a character death. I will never impose that. So for me to talk about what do you think about having this in your first session? Well, for me, it's not really a valid point. It's like, well, if it happens, it happened. If it didn't, then don't force it. Obviously, there are some asterisks here. Like, I know Matthew Colville started a campaign not too long ago with a character death. Some people were really happy about it. Some people found it the best thing ever. But what was interesting is that he had some kind of consent from the player. Maybe not official, but they knew what they were getting into. So I feel like that's touching a big part is expectations. If the players, again, spend a lot of time creating their characters and they die at the first game and they didn't expect that to be a possibility, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That's a big problem.
They could be upset. They might never come back. They might never want to play with you again.
Yeah, it could be that bad. But on the other hand, if you told them death is cheap, like life is cheap, right? That means you might die at the first game. They come in knowing that, that's different. Still, I would not plan a death just to prove a point to the players, like, you're gonna die. Yeah, it sets the pace, but I feel like it's poor sportsmanship. It's like,
you're doing this together. I don't think the game master's job in role-playing games is to be against the players.
No.
Right? And maybe that's a whole other conversation. But if your first game session, you're planning the death, or you're planning a scenario where players will die or should die, that's not fair.
I mean, if the player knows this is my not real character and I have my other real character, but then it's not a real death. Then it doesn't mean anything. Well, at least that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Like in the Matthew Colville example, if the character knew, the player knew, then it doesn't really have the impact on the other players. Like, oh, it was just part of the story. I don't know. Not a big fan of it.
But one thing that I do, I don't like the idea of player character death, but I do actually like the idea of NPC death.
Oh yeah.
NPC death in the first game session, I think, does wonders. And maybe that sounds really morbid.
One does.
But it really does. Like you said, it sets the stage. It allows for the players to realize, oh man, death can happen. And I really like to have a player character, or sorry, not a player character, an NPC who's engaging with them, who's very friendly, who's very nice, who shows them the ropes, and then they get killed.
Yeah. And
that tends, in my experience, to rally the players to be like, oh my god, this guy who died, what? Let's work, like, let's...
Yeah.
We have this common thing now that bonds us together, this mourning that, and this vengeance or whatever that they can use to propel themselves forward in terms of role play, which I really like. I really like.
Yeah, and I think if you want to bring it up one more level, is that they die because of a consequence of the player's actions.
Oh.
And I think that's fair game. That's where it's like, you know what, I'm gonna put that encounter, and if they don't do very well, there's gonna be probably a important NPC death. And then it sets the stage, like you said, but now they're like, oh, did we do, like, let's say they rush in and that causes the problem and they die. It's like, oh, next time maybe we shouldn't rush in. Maybe if they take too much time, same kind of thing, same kind of outcome. So that makes them think, then it's a source also that they could use to roleplay. So consequence, if they just die because they die and they weren't able to do anything about it, and then that's, I mean, it's a good death. It could still be used correctly, but I feel like it doesn't have that much.
Yeah, you're kind of losing the oomph a little bit there.
And if you want to bring it another level, watch my campaign diary. So that was an interesting discussion. I don't know.
It was a really interesting discussion. And I think we ended up asking ourselves more questions than we had at the very beginning.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show how complex really starting your first game is.
Yeah, and I think we're agreeing on a lot of things. The part of how much role play, how much combat we want to put. So we both like a decent amount of role play, maybe punctuated with some combat.
And we also agree that the scope should be at our comfort level. Generally speaking, it's usually in a smaller space that then bleeds into maybe a bigger town or a larger scale story arc. But at the end of it all, we really like to try to keep it relevant and tie it back into the main quest as things move forward.
Yeah, and as we ask ourselves all these questions, we discuss a lot of different ways we'd like to try starting a new campaign in the future, and maybe you'd like to steal some of those.
Yeah, hopefully. I think we had some pretty neat ideas.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot of them that we missed as well. So I kind of challenge you guys out there. Share those ideas with us. Do you have a first game that was really, really cool that we didn't talk about? Send it our way. Why was it so cool?
Why was it so cool?
Yeah, share those ideas with us. We'd love to hear them. We'd love to engage with you on them.
Yes, and if you want to engage with us, we have an email that's contactroleplaychat@gmail.com.
We also have a Twitter handle. You can tweet at us. That's roleplaychat with underscores in between each of those words. And that's all the ways you can reach us. I mean, obviously on YouTube as well. You can comment. You can send us messages. And of course, always please like and subscribe and click the bell icon and all of that stuff.
All of that.
It goes a long way. It really does. It really helps us keep doing what we're doing.
Great.
Yeah, well, I think that sums it all up, Chris.
I'm good, Matt.
Let's call it a chat.